Monsters, stay out of this room. You have no business here. No monsters under the bed. You can't fit under there. No monsters hiding in the closet. It's too small in there. No monsters outside the windows. You can't hold on out there. No vampires, no werewolves, no things that bite. You have no business here. Nothing will touch you or hurt you all this night. You have no business here.
This podcast is not suitable for children or those who are easily disturbed. Spoiler warning for whatever is in the title of this episode.
And now for the obligatory socials. Please like, share and subscribe. You can find the podcast on Twitter at HorrorPod69. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Slasher and Goodreads. Become part of the Disturbed community by asking for the Facebook group and Discord links. Send dick pics to the Horror of Babylon podcast at gmail.com. Support the show at patreon.com/The Horror of Babylon. In closing, you can let your friends know that The Horror of Babylon is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible and all other major podcast apps.
Welcome to episode 127 of the Horror of Babylon, where we discuss the Stephen King classic Cujo. I am Ryan, and with me as always is Daniel. Say hi, Daniel.
Nope, nothing wrong here.
We have the sharp cereal pervert.
Oh man, I'm changing that to, that's gonna be my Twitter handle now.
The sharp cereal pervert. Speaking of serial listeners of this podcast, thank you to our patrons, Abigail the First, Breaker of Chains, Mother of Dragons, and
Logan,
the Full Metal Patron, and Ben the Fourth, Patron of Hope, and Mia the Fifth, the Rainmaker.
She makes it rain.
Oh, she makes it rain, and Sierra the Sixth, the Keyblade Patron. And thank you to Four Horsemen Comics and Gaming, which you can visit at the Morgantown Mall in Morgantown, West Virginia, the Mall at Robinson in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. You can shop online at fourhorsemen.tcgplayerpro.com. And if you make it into the store, say hello to Ronald III, Grampus of Christmas. And he might ask you to hop in the car and run it down the hill and up so he can take a listen to it, but just ignore him. He doesn't know what he's talking about.
You should never get in a car for Ron.
No, never ever get in a car with Ron. Don't go in his barn either. Trigger warning: dogs, dog attacks, death of children, adultery.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a long list, but they're all really bad.
This book probably triggered me more than any other book.
I think this is...
I was furiously writing notes.
I think, aside from Pet Sematary, this is probably the book that I've had the biggest emotional reaction to.
Yeah, we'll get into that.
Yeah, our history with Cujo. Daniel?
This was one of the first Stephen King books I bought, and then I just didn't read it. I had this habit where I buy books and then don't read them, and then they just pile up. And then when I was starting to go through some of my backlog, I tried reading it once. And I can't remember what was boring me about it, but I just kind of set it down and I got distracted by other things.
Yeah, boring is not a word that I would use to describe this book.
I think it was the cereal. When they were talking about marketing, I was like, ugh. And I was just kind of done. And then I tried to read it again right after my wife left me, which was not a great idea.
No.
And then I tried to read it when I was in a very self-destructive suicidal phase, which wasn't very smart either.
No.
And now I finally finished it for this podcast.
Yay! And you're not dead.
Yeah. Yet.
So, like a lot of people, my history with Cujo is the movie. It was one of the movies that I rented from the video store as a kid, and it was one of the Stephen King ones that I first saw, along with It and Pet Sematary and Graveyard Shift. So it was kind of like a foundational horror movie for me. The first time I read the book was a couple years ago. Probably like 3 years ago at this point, and I was going through the Stephen King catalog, and I was like, okay, now I'll read the one about the dog. I remember liking that movie when I was a kid, and I was just kind of blown away. I was like, wow, this is a really good book, and it's about so much more than a dog that wants to bite people.
I can't remember where I heard this phrase, but like when someone was giving tips on how to write a horror novel, they were always like, the book is never actually about the spooky monster, it's about this thing, and they use Cujo as an example. They're like, it's not about a big scary dog, it's about infidelity.
Yeah, to me, this book is about relationships, communication between, it's about marriage, and it's about communication or lack of communication between married partners, and it kind of uses two different families as examples.
Yeah.
And then he does that a lot. Like, you know, it isn't about a scary clown. It's about childhood and growing up in your fears. Pet Sematary isn't about zombies coming out of a graveyard. It's about death and how we view it and how we deal with it. It's a very Stephen King thing to do. But why are we covering this book right now?
Because the sequel's coming out.
Yay, sequels!
and you use that as a reason to go, hey, Daniel, it's time to finally actually sit down and read it.
Yep. The sequel is Rattlesnakes. It's either a short story or a novella. We don't know. We are recording this on Friday, May 17th. The collection it comes out in, You Like It Darker, releases this Tuesday. We both have it pre-ordered on Audible, and we'll be recording an episode on it 1 week from today. So that's exciting.
Yeah.
The vampire's a pure myth, superstition.
I may be able to bring you proof that the superstition of yesterday can become the scientific reality of today.
Background. Cujo is a 1981 horror novel written by Stephen King. In Stephen King's nonfiction work on writing, where he discusses writing, he says that he barely remembers writing Cujo at all. He wrote this book during the height of his struggle with alcohol addiction. Can you imagine just like, oh, I wrote a book. Hey, this is good.
So there are times when I think about becoming an alcoholic.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, maybe it'll make me good.
So I have a little bit here on the inspiration. Apparently, King described back in the 70s he was having issues with his motorcycle, and he went to a mechanic who lived on the outskirts of Bridgeton, Maine, and it was like a mechanic who lived out in the country and operated out of their barn, and he pulls up to the shop, and right after he gets there, a giant St. Bernard comes out of the garage and starts growling at him. And he says that it even lunged at him, but the mechanic hit the dog with a wrench to keep him from attacking Stephen King. And of course, Stephen King was extremely shaken by this encounter. And sometime after that, he read a story that in Portland, Maine, a young child was killed by a St. Bernard. And also, Stephen King owned a dysfunctional Ford Pinto during that time period. So it just kind of took all these desperate pieces from his life and kind of melded them together into this book.
He does that a lot.
Yeah. This book was released September 8th, 1981. It won the British Fantasy Award in 1982. Other books that have won that award: Floating Dragon by Peter Straub.
This we should cover.
We can do that in season 4.
Yeah. The
Ceremonies by T.E.D. Klein, It by Stephen King, and Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia, which I also want to check out that book. It was a nominee for the Locust Award for Best Fantasy Novel, which I think they group horror and sci-fi and fantasy together. And it was a nominee for the Balrog Award.
That's such a cool name for an award.
I've never heard of the Balrog Awards, but I just included it because the Balrog
Award.
Yeah, I do too. It's really cool. According to the American Library Association, Cujo was the 49th most banned book in the United States between 1990 and 1999.
Did it say why it got banned?
I
guess violence, death of kids, because something like that gets...
I mean, I probably wouldn't assign this to a group of high school. I don't know. It's not that. Maybe I would. Not middle school. I wouldn't. I definitely would not ban it.
Yeah.
But it's also not like the first book that I would assign a group of kids to read.
Yeah.
But there's definitely I think there could be value in teaching it.
Yeah, it only uses the N-word like 3 times. That's great for
Yeah,
Stephen King.
for King, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
It has one film adaptation in 1983, which we are doing an episode on next week. And like we said, it has the upcoming sequel, Rattlesnakes, in the collection You Like It Darker.
And that's that. Another story in the classic, infallible 3-act structure. Good enough for Aristotle, good enough for The Simpsons.
Mr. Sislak, I have a feeling there's going to be one more act to this story.
Well, I'm not hanging around for that. 4 acts.
Structure and themes. So what are your kind of just your general thoughts on the structure of this book?
It's pretty straightforward.
I would say it's more straightforward than a lot of his books.
You don't get really like flashback sequences. You get more like exposition flashbacks.
Yeah, it's kind of anecdotal.
Yeah, like where they're like, this is how I got myself into this situation. They think about it to themselves.
Yeah.
Instead of like going, because sometimes Stephen King will like go back in time and then recount the event.
And then sometimes when he's back in time, he'll go back in time again.
Yeah, a flashback within a flashback within a memory within a dream.
And Roland's telling the story around the campfire.
Sometimes I forget that's the frame narrative.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's to its benefit. I like his complicated structures more often than I don't.
I think for this story, straightforward works better.
Yeah, I agree. And there are a lot of characters, and it's always third person omniscient with going between various characters, but I never got confused about who we were.
Yeah.
Which has happened on occasion in other Stephen King books.
Yeah.
And I think, like, for the most part, all the characters and their viewpoints are pretty distinguished, so it's pretty easy read. I would say this is one of the easier reads for a Stephen King book, as long as you're not completely turned off by serial marketing.
I don't remember what it was, but something about it made me go, I'll read this later. Mm-hmm. And that's all I can remember about when I first put it down.
Were you in your 20s at that point?
Maybe.
Yeah. I could...
I had to have been, because I got that book before I was married.
I thought the marketing stuff was pretty interesting, but I imagine if I read that when I was younger, I would be a lot less interested. Not that that's my favorite part of the book.
Yeah, it's like, it doesn't, like, turn me off now, but that's the only thing that I can remember about when I first put it. I, like, trying to think, like, 10, 15 years ago, I'm going, why did I put this down? Was it because of that? Because that's like because I remember when I put the books down. The first time I put it down was around the serial marketing. The second time I put it down was when Tad was screaming and crying because his mom yelled at him, and all I could do was picture Asher screaming and crying, and it made me sad, so I put it down.
Yeah.
And then the third time I put it down because I was like, this book is going to make me kill myself, so I put it down.
Good. Good.
And then this time we were having 3-hour sits at work, and I read it over the course of a weekend because I had to have something on my mind. It's
also a relatively short book for Stephen King.
I think it's even it might have been considered long like a decade ago, but like by today's standards, like a lot of books these days, like 500 pages is considered short. Yeah,
we've kind of gotten into this place in pop culture, not only with books but with movies, where just people think more is better and longer is better. I do like long books and movies, but it's not always the best decision.
I think part of that's probably to do with like marketing research. Like people want more bang for their buck, and they see a slightly thicker book that's the same price as the slightly smaller book.
Like I really want to go see Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, but it's 2.5 hours long.
Oh my god!
And I have to go see it by myself because nobody else wants to see it. So
I'd go see it with you, but I haven't watched any of those movies.
Well, this one resets the timeline, so it wouldn't really matter. It's hard for me to like, okay, when do I have 3 hours
to just go sit and watch a movie by yourself?
Yeah.
But
I know if I don't see it in theaters, I'm gonna absolutely regret it because those are very like big, epic movies. Okay, so let's jump into themes. To me, like there's a ton of themes in this movie, but there's there's two like massive ones.
You want to know what phrase kept coming up in my brain when I was reading this book? A series of unfortunate events.
Yeah. I think
that's all I could think of, because I was like, man, this is a string of coincidences that just have the worst possible outcomes.
Lemony Snicket co-authored this book.
Yeah, that's all I could think of when I was reading this.
I have a few before we get into themes. I have I think it was 3 key lessons that you should learn from this book. Give your pets their shots, especially if they're outside pets. Mm-hmm. Don't buy a Ford. And what was the third one? If you're a cop, always call it in before you go onto a scene.
It's standard procedure. I was screaming. Mm-hmm. I knew that.
Well, we'll get into that when we talk about Bannerman, but I have a defense, but it's the same defense he gives himself.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about that later. All right. So to me, the first of the 2 big themes, which we've already started talking about, is coincidence versus fate. Mm-hmm. Because it's just the whole book is a series of coincidences. And if even just one of these things didn't happen or did happen how you think it should have, like it would have just dominoed and like saved 4 people's lives.
Yeah.
And it's kind of crazy to think that he wrote this book drunk out of his mind, but he makes all these little pieces fit together so well.
Part of me even thinks it might have been because he was drunk. Like, he's writing this book and he goes, well, it just happens because it happens this way.
Yeah.
Like he's just writing the story.
Like maybe the alcohol turned all his filters off and he wasn't thinking about how people are going to take it. And it's just like, this is what happens.
Yeah, it's just what happens in the story. Well, why didn't they act this way? Because they didn't act that way. Stop asking questions. Read the book. But at the same time, he's also such just like a good writer that even drunk, I think he probably put more thought into it than that. But maybe it's a low column A, low column B.
For me, the second time, this is my second time reading it, and I tried to think about if these things are actually coincidences or if there's an influence from a greater force. And there's the suggestion that the evil spirit of Frank Dodd, who is the serial killer who was killed a couple years in Castle Rock, Maine, a couple years before the start of this book. There's a lot of mentions of him and like his presence. Mm-hmm. And like the one that really got me was when Donna is going to take the Pinto out to Joe Camber's. She wants to call a sitter and leave Tad with the sitter. And Tad goes to his room and has a nap. And then he has a nightmare, and it mentions like the spirit in his closet, because that's where the spirit of Frank Dodd resides in their house. He has a nightmare that makes him throw a fit that makes Donna take him with him. So my thought was like, is Frank Dodd like pushing buttons and trying to, he knows about Cujo and he's trying to make Donna take Tad with him so that Tad can also die.
I think the worst part about reading the Dark Tower series right now is just this like tacit knowledge that everything's connected.
Yeah.
So yeah, probably.
I'll mention this now, and then we'll talk about it a little bit more in Zombie Day. Cujo is sort of a spin-off of the Dead Zone. Mm-hmm. It is absolutely not necessary to read the Dead Zone before you read Cujo.
I'm glad, because I don't think I've read the Dead Zone.
You would remember. It's one of his best. But it definitely increases your enjoyment of Cujo. The sheriff, George Bannerman, is one of the main characters in the Dead Zone, but we'll talk a little bit about that in Zombie Day. Okay, and then the other one that I think is the big theme is relationships, marriage, communication, adultery. That's the obvious one. Obviously, it's not the same for me as it is for you, but adultery can be very hard in media. What I like about it in this book is it doesn't villainize either Vic or Donna. It explains the situation in like a very honest way, it doesn't justify Donna's actions, but it explains Donna's actions, I feel like, pretty well.
I hated her explanations.
They're hers. Like, they're her personal reasons. Like, nobody else has to understand them.
Yeah. It's like every time a woman's told me, oh, I just don't have feelings for you anymore. Okay, well, I can't really do anything with that. Or, well, he just makes me so happy. All right, I guess, thanks.
That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the fact that she doesn't want to live in Maine. She wanted to stay in New York. Mm-hmm. And they never had that conversation. They're two people who love each other, but they want two different things. Vic wants to live in Maine. He wants to live in the country. Donna wants to live in New York City. She wants to live in the city. And they're both just hoping that the other one is going to change instead of...
I recognize that too.
instead of not talking about it, and of course it ends up in something bad, which is a very real thing, obviously, that happens. Which is why I like this, as opposed to a lot of movies or books or shows where it's just like, that bitch cheated. That's that. Or that guy's a dick, he cheated on his wife, and that's that, and that's all you need to know.
Yeah.
It makes them very real. Okay, and then I mentioned earlier, I feel like it's kind of the story of like two families or two marriages. You have Vic and Donna and their son, and Joe and Charity and their son, and both families, both relationships have issues, but they have very, very different issues, and then they come up upon the same problem, which is Cujo.
A hole no one knows about and still doesn't know about.
Yeah.
And bats.
The continued villainizing of bats by the media.
Listen, they're like one of the top carriers of rabies.
Yeah,
so.
this is a very, as opposed to Morbius, this is a very realistic.
Yeah, like if I remember, God, speaking of my ex-wife, a bat landed on her and she had to get these shots because bat bites can be so pinpricky that you don't know if you've been bitten, and they're so likely to carry rabies that if one lands on you, it's recommended you get rabies shots.
Yeah.
So,
I've never been bitten by a bat. I've been bitten by a possum, not by a bat. I didn't have to get I did get, like, I forget what I got. I got some kind of shot, but not a rabies shot because...
Might have been a tetanus shot.
Yeah, it was a tetanus shot.
They can carry tetanus in their mouths.
But possums don't carry rabies. Yeah. Or at least they're not known to.
Yeah, they're one of the species that is like, I guess there's just no documented evidence of it.
Yeah. And that was years ago, and I still don't have rabies, so I think we're good.
Yeah.
And I'm not afraid of water.
I am, but not to drink it.
Yeah.
Drink your water.
Another big theme, monster/fear, like monster in the closet, the monster under the bed, and then the fucking monster comes to life.
The monsters that people can be.
Yes.
Stephen King's really good at that. Because, again, like, what's the book really about? He's very good at incorporating... We'll get more into this when we get into characters. There's some that I think he does really well in this book, and there's one that I think is a really poor example for him, which I think the movie actually does better.
I think we're probably talking about the same... Because I think that the majority of the characters in this book are portrayed to be very gray. They're regular people who do good and bad things, with the exception of one character.
And then we have this one dude who's kind of we'll get into it.
Okay, yeah, we're talking about.
I think the movie it's like the one thing I think the movie does better.
Yeah, no, I agree. Okay, and then marketing and advertising. Like I thought that stuff was interesting.
I like it now. Mm-hmm. It might have been one of those things where like I was in the mood to read something else.
Yeah.
So, like, when I'm reading this, it's distracting me. I'm like, I'd rather be reading the sci-fi books.
Did you do the physical book for this one? Okay.
Yeah.
The audiobook for this is very good. I'm just going to look up who narrates it really quick. It's a woman. She does a really excellent job.
Do you know who narrates Wind Through the Keyhole?
No.
Stephen King.
Oh!
He's a great writer. His narration isn't that great.
I have heard him narrate short stories before, and it's okay.
He just doesn't have the range that some of these other actors do, and that's fine. Like, his talent is obviously in writing.
Lorna Raver, she does
a cool cover.
Yeah. The cover's super sweet. I will put that in the YouTube version for those who want to see it. It is a very nice cover.
I always like looking at like different covers.
I had Pet Sematary going through my head the entire time I was reading this book. There's so many ways that it's similar and then there are a lot of ways that it's different. It does, like Pet Sematary, it kind of merges the supernatural with a very real world fear. But this one does it way more subtly than Pet Sematary. This one is more akin, there's a trope called magical realism, which is where you take something hyper realistic and then just kind of vaguely put something supernatural in it, where to the point where you're not even sure if that's actually happening. Like, you can't, you can read this book and say, like, did Frank Dodd's ghost make Cujo go in that hole and get scratched by a bat with rabies? Did Frank Dodd's ghost really chessboard manipulate all of these coincidences? Maybe not. It's you're never going to get a definitive answer about that kind of stuff. But to me, the dread, it was worse the second time because I didn't know the ending the first time I read it. But reading it the second time and knowing what the ending was gave it a real similar sense of dread to reading Pet Sematary, where you're just waiting. When you're reading Pet Sematary, to me, it's like you're just waiting for the shoe to drop. You're just waiting for Gage to get hit by this car. This is different in that it happens at the end of the book, and it's really the death of the child is a consequence as opposed to being a part of the plot, but it still invokes the same kind of feelings for me. This one's actually kind of worse for me because the book is written in such a way that it's this is how you get the best possible solution, and then it still just doubles down on what's the word I'm looking for? Not dread. I mean, it would be dreadful. Dismal. Yeah, it's a very dismal. There's some word that I'm looking for. I'm sure it'll come to me 10 hours later. It's absolutely morose from start to finish. Yeah. And then and then when you think it's gonna not be, it doubles down on it. And it's funny because it, every other, aside from Tad, every other conflict in the book works out okay. Believe it or not, Vic and Donna have a reconciliation. Vic and Roger get to keep the Sharp cereal account. All of that stuff is nowhere near as important as Tad's life. But, it goes to show that terrible thing happens and then life keeps going. In a way, it is worse than Pet Sematary. I think overall Pet Sematary is the scarier book. I think Pet Sematary is the scarier book. This is the one that leaves me feeling just a little bit worse. Yeah. This was a hard read. This was a very hard read. And I've been sick all week, and I've been reading this as I've been being sick. I love this book. I think this book is great, but it does not make me feel good. There is nothing in this book that makes me happy. It creates a ton of anxiety and dread in me, but I also love it because I just appreciate the shit out of it. I also get very mad when I read this book. There's a lot to get mad over. Okay, and then Loss of the Child, but it's different. Like I said, in It, or where Georgie dies and it's part of the story, or in Pet Sematary, Gage dies halfway through because that's what the story's about. But this is, Tad dies right at the end. It's a consequence of everything. Yeah.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Okay, so let's jump into characters. Let's start with the Trentons. So I've got this book. I've got the Trentons, the Cambers, and then just a couple other people. A couple other people that matter. Yeah. There are actually a ton of characters in this book. There's a lot of characters. There's a lot of characters.
Hiya! Happy Easter!
You might go, well, why did they even include this? I'm it's kind of part of the... Yeah. That, I think he's an FBI agent. Or the guy who works for the... state police. It's the Attorney General's office. That's right. Yeah. Because he sends Bannerman up. Because that's the thing, is he thinks Bannerman is just distracted. It's part of the domino effect. Mason. His name is Mason. I don't... There's a conversation to be had about that character, but there's also, Gary Purvier. Yeah. Vic's partner, Roger. Yeah. There's
And even like the old lady, like Aunt Evelyn or Aunt, like I mean, there's
it's gonna be a hot summer.
Yeah. Oh my God, that is like the worst foreboding. It's gonna be the hottest summer on record.
The last thing she heard was a child laughing, but as the light faded out, it sounded like screaming. Great line.
This fucking book. The lady who does the audiobook does like this perfect Maine accent, and I've been talking like it all week. Her George Bannerman is amazing.
How has your family been liking that one?
Not at all. The part where Mason says to Bannerman, he says, "Do you have a problem with me, Bannerman?" Nothing I can't handle.
I can't do accents. I really wish I could.
Yep.
Yeah, I've tried. Ryan's heard me for years. I've given up.
It's all right. Okay, so I'll let you say your piece about Donna. I mean, like, there's obvious reasons why you wouldn't like her, but what do you think?
I have no kind words to say about her.
Okay, well, do you have any reasonable, not kind words to say about her?
Okay, there's a few lines in this book that had me furiously writing notes that I left at home. Mm-hmm. That just made me unreasonably mad. Because I've been on the receiving end of these conversations, and I think anyone would start to tunnel vision. The first one is when she's trying to explain what happened, or like Vic asks her for it, and she's like, it's not really something I can explain. He's like, well, try me. Mm-hmm. And she basically goes, well, he made me feel young. And then he goes, you banged him so you wouldn't feel old? And then she goes, that's not what I mean. I'm like, that's exactly what you said, woman. That's exactly, word for word, what you're explaining. But it sounds so childishly straightforward and juvenile that it makes you look shitty, so you don't want to boil it down to that. The second one is, when he goes, was he the only one? And Stephen King, I don't know if he's been on these sort of receiving ends of conversations, but this is like the most poignant and true thing I've ever experienced. Is in her head, she goes, it was the one thing he had no right to ask, and all I can think is, fuck you, he has every right to ask that. If you did it once, you'd probably do it again.
I don't know, I think that's kind of controlling on Vic's part.
Oh no, fuck Donna. I'm 100% on Vic's side.
In that specific exchange, I understand Donna's point of view there.
No, man. Because he's sitting there, he's like, am I going to get another note? And is this going to be something that keeps happening throughout my life if I try to make this work?
That's real self-destructive logic.
You know what else is self-destructive logic? I'm going to bang this dude because I feel a little bit old.
Yeah, but that's an emotional decision, not a logical decision.
Fuck Donna. She should have died. That's my opinion of Donna.
I like Donna a lot. I think she's up there with one of my favorite of his female leads. She's not Fran or Susan or Bev, but I think she's a really fleshed out character. I understand the situation she's in, and I don't agree with her actions, but I think he paints a really good picture of their relationship, and I don't approve of adultery, but I think the key takeaway for me is they're both her and Vic are at fault to some extent. Maybe it's 80% her and 20% him, or 90% her and 10% him, but they both fail to have a conversation. Like, when you're in a relationship, it's good to have these big picture conversations. Where are we going to live? What are we doing for a living? How many kids are we going to have? And she does not like living in Maine. It makes her, and she's unhappy. That doesn't justify her having an affair, but she and Vic should have had a conversation about that, because when you leave these things unsaid and you let these things simmer, then shit happens. But of course, a lot of our interpretations of this book are going to be influenced by our life experiences, and different people have had different life experiences. So it makes sense.
If it was up to me, Cujo would have eaten her from the feet up.
Okay, then.
Yeah.
All right. What about, well, let's do, I had Tad, but let's do Vic.
Vic is a dumbass.
Yeah.
I really relate to him in a lot of ways. I've been there, buddy. But at the same time, I agree with you. You should have been talking to your wife about this nonsense. Where do you want to live? What are we gonna do?
Mm-hmm.
And there's times I'm sitting there reading this book going, buddy, like, this is a good point that this horrible woman is making.
So, it's not, he doesn't have an excuse that, well, she never said she didn't want to live in Maine, because there's a point later in the book where Roger says, I'm going to try, Roger doesn't speak with a Maine accent, but I'm going to try it. Well,
New Yorker.
Yeah. Well, Donna never took to Maine the way the rest of us did. So even he notices that she's not happy. So Vic, as her husband, mm-hmm. It's your job to pick up on that and say, hey, is this working out for you? Let's talk. Like,
I will give him credit. He handled the cheating conversation probably the best way I've seen someone do it in fiction.
I agree.
Because you do start to see red a little bit.
I would imagine. He didn't
strike her.
Saying that he didn't beat his wife isn't a good thing, but because obviously you shouldn't beat your wife. However, I will say that I like that Stephen King let Vic acknowledge that he has those feelings, that because he says to himself, I just want to hit her, or I want to find Steve Kemp.
I don't care what anybody says. That thought will enter your head.
Right. And it enters Vic's head, but he processes it, and instead he talks to her. Way too fucking late. Yeah. But I agree. He is a dumbass, but he's extremely relatable.
I think he's a good dad.
I love how good a dad he is. The other thing that's a big flag to Vic about me, and it's different for me, because I specifically chose a job where I work 9 to 5, Friday through Monday, or Monday through Friday, no weekends, no nights. I've been at this job for 5 years. I had to travel one time, and it was for 3 days. Mm-hmm. I specifically chose a job like that, so I would never have to choose between working and spending time with the family. Now, obviously, not everyone in the world can do that.
Yeah.
And even people who can may not choose to do that, because what they like to do and what they're good at doing may lead them to doing things that rely on traveling or working nights, like this marketing job where he has to go to all these cities. But the whole time I'm just like, dude, just don't go. Just don't go. But I mean, he has a very good reason for going.
I mean, like, you're gonna lose your house. You're gonna lose starting over again sucks.
Mm-hmm.
Again, also been there. Sometimes you have to make a choice, and sometimes you make the wrong one. I can relate to making the wrong one more than once. And I also
understand that him thinking maybe space between them is a good decision.
Yeah.
What I was thinking as I was reading is that you two are finally talking. Don't leave for 10 days and break off that conversation. Keep it going. And then I was also like, this is just like a difference in times, where he's like, oh, I'll try to call every other night. And I'm like, that's stupid. You can make 10, 15 minutes to call every night. And then Donna mentions later that they can't afford the long distance charges. And I'm like, oh, yeah. I forgot about that.
I forgot that was a thing.
Yeah.
No.
Beck and I had to deal with that in high school. We both ran up phone bills quite a bit, and we had to start buying phone cards and using phone cards.
That's funny.
Yeah. So he is an idiot. He's super relatable, and it's rough. Like it's a really rough book to read.
Yeah.
Okay, Tad.
He makes me cry, and that's all I can say about it.
Yeah.
I picture my stepson still when I read this book, and not like as he is now, but as he was like when I met him.
The kid in the movie has like the exact same hair that Drake does, and in the movie when he's like down to his underwear and he's face down in the back of the Pinto crying, he's also like super skinny like Drake, and like his shoulder blades poke out the back like Drake does. So when he's like face down crying, it's just Drake to me. Like it's hard.
Yeah.
So I guess let's talk about Tad's death.
Why? Is this designed to hurt me?
Do you think you would like the book more or less if Tad lived?
I don't think anything could make me like this book in the way that I would enjoy reading it. It's a great, it's a well-written book, but this book absolutely depresses me.
So, okay, how about this? So just dipping into the movie a little bit. The movie gives like all the same like stressors, intense and anxiety, but at the end of the movie, there's a, and you get that release. Would Tad living make this better in the book if you knew at the end it's all okay? I mean, obviously he's going to be in therapy for the rest of his life, but
I honestly can't say. It's one of those situations where I entered into the book knowing that was the difference. Because it's like Vader is Luke's father thing. It's just one of those things I know.
Yeah.
That's the big change. And like when I watched the movie, I'm like, this ending feels more Hollywood. But when I'm reading the book, I'm like, this book feels like it's designed to literally just hurt me as much as possible. Which I don't find to be enjoyable.
I think each ending fits the piece of media it's in. I think that him dying, it goes well with the book and the themes and the sense of just the overall tone of the book.
In the sense that it's just trying to be as morose as possible.
Yeah.
Like, how long's he been dead? Like, come on, dude, did you have to phrase it like that?
Yeah. That was bad. I think part of the worst thing about the book for me was the description of how Donna just goes feral after Tad dies, and like how they just have trouble getting her into an ambulance.
She had rabies.
Yeah.
I have to joke because it makes me uncomfortable.
I mean, that's like, I don't like to think about my kids dying, but when I do, I was like, is my mind just going to break if that happens? And that's essentially what happens to her.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's rough. Okay. Let's talk about the Cambers. Let's start with Cujo.
Get your dogs their shots.
Yeah.
Keep your dogs on leashes. There are people who let pit bulls wander around my neighborhood, and every time I see them, I'm like, if that thing comes into my yard and even approaches me, I'm going to smack it with my weed eater. I do not care.
Yeah.
Like, I love dogs too. I don't want to hurt the dog.
No.
But pit bulls can fuck you up.
Yeah.
Saint Bernards can fuck you up.
Can murder you.
Yeah. They are big animals that can bite so hard they can crush your skull. Keep your dogs on leash. There's a leash law in West Virginia, people. I'm so mad at my neighbors.
Like I said, the number one lesson from this book is get your pets their shots.
And even that's not like a guarantee.
No, but it helps.
It helps. That's like the bare minimum.
So as I'm reading this book, it's like, it's hard to pin the blame on like one particular person.
No, because it's just a series of unfortunate events.
But you got to think, if Joe and Charity got that dog its fucking shots.
Well, Joe said it's Brett's dog.
It's Brett's dog. You know what? He couldn't talk the vet into giving him a discount. The vet was like, "Oh, I need a new carburetor." He's like, "All right, I'll give you a discount on that carburetor if you knock some bucks off those shots."
I'm not going to like make fun of like poor people or hillbillies, because again, I've been super poor.
Yeah.
I live in West Virginia, and so this is actually kind of a representation of how like people will sometimes like exchange goods and services.
Yep.
And how sometimes when you're just a certain type of person, you don't think about shots.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, I just have a pet dog.
Yeah.
It's very realistic. It's very irresponsible, but it's very realistic.
Yeah. In a world where medical costs are a huge burden on people for themselves and their children and their partners, it's sometimes it's cumbersome to think about spending money on medical costs for your pets. But if your pet is large enough to murder somebody, you should get them their fucking shots. I mean, you should do it for cats and small dogs too, but...
Yeah. I do like the way that Stephen King writes, like, from Cujo's perspective.
Yes, I love it.
I don't have a lot to say other than that. I mean...
I like that...
It's a very scary animal to have rabies.
I like that it doesn't villainize Cujo, because even Donna, at a point, as much as she hates this fucking dog, acknowledges he's also a victim.
They even, like, the Trentons don't even sue them at the end of the book.
Yeah,
when I'm pointing that out.
Yeah, and I don't think I would either, because just like that's not going to make anybody. That's not going to help anything. But even though they are well within their rights to do so.
I don't want to be on Donna's side or any person who decides to cheat on their married partner. Mm-hmm. But I will say that the biggest lesson you can take away from this book is at some point you just have to acknowledge that if you want things to go to a certain way, you have to move on. Mm-hmm. And that's all you can do. And for them, it's like right at the end of they don't sue anybody. They walk away from the situation and work on everything else. And it's the same thing with infidelity. If you want to stay with that partner, you can't bring it up anymore. You can't hold it over their heads.
You have to forgive them.
And you have to move on. And if you can't do that, then you move on from the relationship. And that's also 100% okay, but you have to make that choice.
Yeah.
And that's what both of them should have done sooner. Like, if Vic didn't think he could move on past it, he should go, it's done. I need to start working on this. Mm-hmm. And he should have just done that. Or he should have said, I can't hold this over her head. I have to work on healing the relationship. And the 10, 20, whatever % I did wrong. Mm-hmm. And that's what you have to do. And if you can't do that, it leads into domino effects, speaking from experience, that make things worse.
Yeah. And the first time I read it, it honestly amazed me that they decide to stay together at the end of the book.
Yeah.
Not like them together. It's not like, oh man, I can't believe Vic wants to stay with her. But it's like, honestly, it makes more sense to me on the second read that either of them would want to stay with each other because of Tad. Mm-hmm. It sounds so bad, but like losing the kid just makes the adultery seem so much more trivial.
Yeah, it does. So,
not trying to take away from it, because it is bad, but
that's about the only. If I wanted to like give you a lesson I could take from this book, or that anyone should take from this book, based off of my personal experiences, those are your choices. At some point, you have to just go, I have to move on, and choose the direction. The
number one thing I want to learn about in Rattlesnakes, it says that he's a widower in the description. You can assume that means he was married to Donna and Donna died. It could mean that they got divorced and he married somebody else.
Yeah.
But what I'm curious about is, did their relationship continue? How was it? Did they have more children? I don't know if I could.
As long as they don't name them Tattoo.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's bad.
I make dark jokes to deal with tragedy.
Yeah, that was bad.
Joe.
Okay, so Joe is a really good example of a Stephen King character who's not a good guy, but he's not a villain either.
He's a very realistic bad person.
Like, he's selfish, he beats up his wife, but it also makes it very clear that he loves his son. He's maybe...
He loves his son in the way that he knows how to love a family member.
But it also, like, he's passing down his values. He's trying to make his, maybe not intentionally, but his wife at least perceives that he's trying to make his son into a smaller version of himself, which, you know, most fathers do that in some way.
I think what's most funny is that those values he tries to pass down, his wife starts to see, like, because she idealized her sister.
Yeah.
And then, like, when she's actually starting to hang out with her, she's like, I really don't have anything in common with these people.
Yeah.
And it's like there's some sort of middle ground that I feel that because they can't communicate.
Charity's sister married a law student and moved to Connecticut and lives in the city, and they have money. Charity decided to marry locally and stays in rural Maine, and they make a living, but they're not well off. Like, they're not exactly like, they're not living on the streets. They have a house. He has a job. They make a living, but, you know, they have to work for it. They struggle.
Yeah.
And it's living like month to month. I've been there. I've done that. It's hard. And obviously, like, when you get letters and postcards from your sister whose husband became a lawyer, and they have all this money, and you see as your marriage goes on and you're starting to fall out in love with your husband, and you're seeing more of his bad side than his good side, and you're seeing your son, who's the most important thing to you, starting to grow up and becoming a smaller version of your husband, it's distressing. And you start doing the grass is greener on the other side of the fence. I need to show my son that there's a better life out there. And then you get there and you're like, okay, this isn't exactly perfect either. It's hard. I really sympathize with Charity for prioritizing her son and wanting to show him that there's another way to live so he can make a choice.
Yeah.
But I'm also going to be super critical. I think if there was, like, within the actual plot of the book, the one person who made the worst decision, who could have stopped everything, was Charity. Because Brett goes out in the fog, Cujo growls at him, has foam all over his face. He goes in the house, he says, Mom, Cujo's sick. He growled at me and he has foam coming out of his mouth. And I understand her decision. She makes the completely selfish decision to ignore it and let Joe deal with it. And that cost 4 people their lives.
Yeah.
I understand, because she of all that stuff I just said, but of all the things and all the circumstances in this book, I think that's the one point where one adult could have made an active decision and failed to do it, and it just dominoes from there.
No, I agree with you. I don't really have anything to add to that. I think that's the pivotal decision. I do think that there's, like, a chance that if they would have gone, oh, let's go do something, Cujo maybe would have killed all 3 of them anyway.
Possible.
But that's kind of playing devil's advocate. That's like me assuming the best case scenario for her good decision, or the worst case scenario for her. I don't know how to phrase that.
Yeah, no.
But it's just something that could have happened. The more likely thing is, oh, I recognize rabies. Go get my gun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, unfortunately, at that point, there's nothing you can do. You just have to put the dog down.
Yeah.
And honestly, as awful as this is, they all could have still gone on their trips. Yeah. They could have.
It wouldn't have happened, at least I assume that it wouldn't have happened.
Or at least it would have been delayed.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's go in a day or 2 instead.
That's
But
yeah, no, that I agree with you.
And the dark part for me about Charity is she makes this awful decision, which for good reasons, but everything works out really well for her in the end. Her husband, her abusive husband, dies. She gets to keep all the money she won.
She gets a job that's just good enough.
Is good enough, and she gets to, and her son obviously survives, and she gets to stay with her son and raise him the way she wants to raise him, because that's another thing.
And she gets him a dog.
Yeah, she gets him a dog, which I probably wouldn't have done, but I don't know. Maybe it's important to move on.
I have mixed feelings about it. It's like having another kid after your kid dies. It's like, it's like this really sort of weird thing to me.
Well, it's not only that his dog died, but his dog killed 4 people. Yeah. I don't know.
Has he had his shots?
Yes, he's had his shots.
Smart kid.
Yeah, and I no blame, no fault on Brett. Like fault
to Brett. Joe told him.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm kidding. You can't put like you. It is good to teach a kid some responsibility, but even the book acknowledges that like sometimes Cujo made a mess and Joe cleaned it up anyway.
Yeah, but Brett reported to an adult, the dog is sick.
Yeah,
and the adult is the one who said, "Meh, let your dad deal with it."
Yeah, I think out of all the blameless people, Brett's the most blameless.
Yeah,
he does go along with his mother, but he's a kid.
He's a kid.
Yeah,
he wants to go on vacation. He's probably never been on a real vacation.
And when your mom starts saying this stuff to you, oh, well, I mean, I guess it's logical. She's the adult.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. They also didn't know that Joe was planning on leaving. Well, she assumed something like that.
Yeah, she's probably going to go horn around, but whatever.
But Brett didn't know that.
You're going to go horn around and get the clap.
Try see a couple dirty movies and try and get the clap.
I fucking love it.
Yeah, it's funny. Steve Kemp, I think, definitely is important enough to warrant some discussion.
I have these really weird feelings about Steve Kemp. My feelings about Steve Kemp is in the book he is written how I imagine a guy that would fuck a married woman is. That's how I picture the person. Mm-hmm. But I'm saying that he's like cartoonishly villainous at some point.
Yeah, the jerking off on the on the duvet. It's just
and destroying the house, going there with the intention of raping her. There's a point where I'm I understand the logical spite of writing a letter. You've been spurned. You also feel old. I understand that logic.
Yeah.
And then he drives away. And at that point, I'm if he would have been not in the book anymore, I think it would have been perfect. Except, cut out, him threatening to rape her at the beginning.
The vandalism gives them a distraction to keep them from going to Camber's to look for them.
Yeah, I'm just talking, character-wise.
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
Not coincidence-wise.
I agree with you.
Because he's written so cartoonishly evil that you have someone to focus your hate on. And, again, I've been cheated on. I hate to tell people this. The people that do it are usually just people.
Yeah, sometimes they don't even know.
They're not like this supervillain that's going to rape your wife if she leaves. Most of the time.
Yeah, unless you're Steve Kemp.
Yeah, and that's...
The half communist, half anarchist, poetry writing tennis player.
I thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah.
Because he's this dude who's he's in his head, he's an artist.
Oh, yeah.
But really, he's 40. Goes job to job because he never really amounted to anything.
Yeah.
I can't relate to that at all.
No.
The way he justifies things in his head. Oh, this is me going against the bourgeoisie family.
Yeah, when he said bourgeoisie, I was like, oh my god.
I'm that's... You're probably sitting there. That's how Daniel thinks of every villain.
Yeah, I'm not going to say that I've never had resentful feelings towards people who have more money than I do.
Yeah, but this was cartoonish.
Yeah, I've never trashed anybody's house.
That's my feelings on Steve Kemp is I feel like if he would have been written more like an actual person instead of a Stephen King cartoon, because he does do some cartoonish villains.
Yeah, but he does it in more outrageous books like The Stand.
Yeah.
The Kid or Trash Can Man are like that, but the book itself is more outrageous.
Yeah. And everything else in this book is so kind of down to earth.
Yeah, it's very grounded in reality, except for just the ghost of a serial killer floating here and there. I agree.
I'm sure it makes it easy to focus your hate on somebody not named Donna. But at the same time, when I'm reading it, I'm oh, now I'm just distracted.
Everything you said is true, and I agree with you. I think I feel about 80% as strongly as you do about it. I think he's the one character who sticks out because every other character on here has some good and some bad. Even Joe Camber. Mm-hmm. But not Steve Kemp. He's just completely over the top. I probably wouldn't change it.
I think it fits the tone. It fits
Yeah.
the tone of the book. And it helps the domino effects.
But he's the only black and white character. And because there's really nothing he does that can be viewed as positive. And whereas like everybody else does bad things, but is also a victim in some way. Cujo murders people, but he's a victim of rabies. Charity ignores her dog having rabies, but she's also a victim of an abusive husband and a home life she's not happy with. Joe becomes a victim of Cujo, but he also beats his wife and wants to go to Boston to get the clap.
He also gives his son $5.
He does. It reminded me of that scene in King of the Hill where Joseph goes to Dale and asks him for money.
Thanks, Dad.
Yeah, to get to go to the video store with Bobby, and Dale just gives him extra money. He's like, you can't rent a movie without... Is it the little chocolate balls? That are gross?
Mutt balls.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dad.
Yeah.
I love it. I hate how much I love that scene.
No, I do too. Okay.
I love Dogo.
Sheriff George Bannerman, I know for sure... So the first time I read Cujo, I had not read The Dead Zone. Now I've read it after reading The Dead Zone, and I won't do any spoilers for The Dead Zone, but just like basic premise, it's about the main character has like psychic powers. Mm-hmm. And the main character doesn't live in Castle Rock, but he lives in a town adjacent to Castle Rock. And Castle Rock is having this string of rape murders on women. It like the youngest victim is like 8 and the oldest one is like 80 something.
Damn, that's a range.
Yeah. And the cops are completely baffled. They can't do anything. So Sheriff George Bannerman reads in the newspaper about this kid with psychic powers, and he goes and he recruits this guy, the main character of The Dead Zone, to work the
Christopher Walken.
Yeah. to work the Frank Dodd case, and he solves it. Finds out that's Frank Dodd, who was a cop in the Castle Rock PD or Sheriff's Department. And George Bannerman is a really great character in that book, and obviously he survives that book, only to die 2 years later in this book, ripped apart by a 200-pound Saint Bernard, and it's rough. Like, I'm sure it doesn't hit the same way if you haven't read The Dead Zone, but
I mean, it's still not great.
No, it's not good.
One of my worst, I mean, you and I have talked about this, one of my worst fears is being eaten alive. Like having my guts torn out, me seeing my guts being torn out. Not quite as bad as being swallowed whole, but still pretty bad.
And Cujo guts him.
Yeah.
Like, he rips out his intestine.
It's descriptive.
Yeah, and like, Bannerman has to try and get back to his squad car while holding his guts. It reminded me of the guy in No Be So Fierce who got attacked by the tiger and had to travel through the jungle back to the hospital while holding his intestines.
And we just sewed him up, leaves them all. It was fine. That cracks me up for some reason.
Yeah, and that's a true story.
Yeah. So I know you can live if your guts fall out of you. I don't know if I'd want to.
Yeah. I also I really like that he drops his gun right outside of Donna's car, and when Donna finally emerges to confront Cujo, she's so emotionally keyed up and like blinded that she completely misses there's a gun and goes for a baseball bat instead, just because she knows she's seen the baseball bat for days and knows it's there, but she just misses that gun.
I will be fair, I don't know much about Donna. If you've never fired a handgun before, there's a chance that the kick will throw you off and you'll just completely miss and she would have died, as opposed to a bat.
Yeah.
Which is a little bit more familiar.
My dad I grew up shooting. My dad has a pretty extensive gun collection, and he had us shooting 357s as like a revolver as kids. So it's
and then like a moving target that's charging you.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you're like, if I had to choose myself, I'd go for the gun.
Yeah, I would probably go for the gun first, and maybe if the opportunity presented itself, also grab the baseball bat.
I'll kill you all! I'll drive you crazy, and I'll kill you all on every nightmare you ever had. I am your worst dream come true. I'm everything you ever were afraid of.
I have been looking forward to this. Scary shit. Is this book scary?
Yeah.
Yes, very. I think it's the scariest book we've read, aside from Pet Sematary, and in some, like we discussed, in some ways it's worse, in some ways it's not as bad. It's rough.
It's scary in a couple of ways. Again, to bring up trope names, you got things like adult fear, which is like losing your account, your wife cheating on you, your kid dying.
Yes.
And then it has realistic fear, like a giant fucking dog that can just get you.
Yes.
And what are you gonna do?
There's also just a lot of things that are anxiety-inducing. Even something as simple as, fuck, my car is acting up again, and I have to go without it because I have to get it to a mechanic. I have to spend more money on it.
Yeah.
Like, it's,
The entire book's like that.
Yeah. You said that you were having some nightmares this past week.
Oh, a shit ton. God, I've actually had more. But I had nightmares about rabid dogs, and in that dream, a kid drowned in a pool, and then I was either put in a box or funneled through a narrow doorway where on the other side, like wherever the opening was I knew there was just nothing but rabid dogs waiting to eat me.
Fuck.
And then, in another dream, I went to a shoe store, and my ex-wife came up to me. I guess she was working in the shoe store. And then the dude she left me for came up and apologized to me. And as I was leaving, I turned around and decided to attack him because I chose to be angry instead of just leaving.
I never would have attacked you if you didn't apologize.
Yeah. And it was like, even in the dream, I acknowledged this is my chance to just walk away from this.
This is your moment.
And instead, I turned around and chose to be angry to the point where people had to pull us apart. And it's like a hyper-realistic dream. I think it's because I've been, like, popping Benadryls lately.
I took Benadryl last night for the first time in years. Mm-hmm. And I stream on Thursday nights. So I took...
to go ahead.
I usually stream for 2 hours. I took the Benadryl before I started streaming because I hadn't taken it in years, and I don't remember it putting me to sleep. Mm-hmm. But like 40 minutes into the stream, I'm just like, I think we're gonna cut it at an hour tonight, guys. I can't do any more.
It's funny. It either like knocks me out or it hypes me up, which I guess is a symptom of ADHD. It's a crapshoot. But I think I've told you, like, you've seen me break out in rashes before. I'm allergic to my own sweat.
Ugh.
That's an oversimplification, but people understand that easier than me explaining, like, the complexity of heat rashes and build up. So I've been popping it a lot lately, and it's just been giving me hyper-realistic dreams. And I guess I've just had Cujo on the brain because those have been my dreams.
This past week, being sick and reading this book, it's been a very rough week. Mm-hmm. Beck was... Because I was lying on the couch in pain earlier, and she's like, "Are you sure you want to record tonight?" And I said, "Yes, I want this over." I love this book, and I love the movie. It's so stress-inducing.
It is stress-inducing, which can also irritate your skin.
Yeah.
Oh my God! Are you Stephen King? No, I'm Dean Koontz. Oh.
All right, so let's go to Kings and Koontz. Daniel, what is your king for Cujo?
I guess just that we finally read a book that just has been stressing me out this much and getting under my skin. It's a very realistically morose book.
Yeah, I think my king is also just my emotional reaction to this story. It's scary. It's anxiety-inducing. It's stress-inducing. It has given me this horrible sense of dread, which is all negative, but I've kind of missed this feeling because we've covered a lot of really good books and movies, but it's been a long time since we've covered something that I actually found scary.
Yeah.
So this, in a way, has been nice, and in a way, it's been awful.
Yeah.
Koontz.
Donna didn't die.
My Koontz is that Donna hasn't seen Old Yeller, apparently. Because there's this line where she sees the dog and she thinks to herself, the only time I've seen a rabid dog is when Gregory Peck shot one in To Kill a Mockingbird. And my immediate reaction is, really? You haven't seen Old Yeller? What the fuck is the matter with you, lady?
That's pretty funny.
Yeah. And Old Yeller is never once referenced throughout the entire either the book or the movie. And I think if there's one rabid dog in pop culture that's more in the zeitgeist than Cujo, it's Old Yeller.
I think it's close. I think these days, I think it used to be Old Yeller. I think these days it's probably Cujo.
Right. But I mean, this was written in the early 80s, though, which was closer to Old Yeller relevance. But ranking...
high-ish.
I ranked it pretty high. I'm wondering if I should knock it down one or two, but I did rank it pretty high.
I mean, no shade to ranking it high.
As is, I have it as my number 4.
I mean...
Below It, Pet Sematary, and Dracula, and right above No Beast So Fierce.
I mean, I ain't gonna knock you for that spot.
Yeah, I mean, but
it is your spot.
The only thing is No Beast So Fierce is also kind of a stressful book, but didn't make me want to just like throw myself off a cliff.
Yeah, but isn't that also part of the best part of this book, is that it pulls those emotions out?
Yeah, all right, it's my number 4.
Mine's also going to be pretty high.
I will take this as a moment to say I think this book gets mentioned a lot as the dog one, but I think it's very underrated. I think it's one of his best books. Maybe because it's a more simple story than a lot of his other books. It gets looked down upon, but
I don't think mine's going to be as high as yours, but it's going to be in the top 20 for sure. I really like The Only Good Indians, but I think that this book pulls a lot more out of me. Hellbound Heart is too horny. Powers of Darkness loses the plot halfway through. It's better than Battle Royale. Do I like it more than The Great God Pan?
Very different.
They're very different, and I think I'm going to put it right below The Great God Pan. Those sort of books just appeal more to me.
So it's your new number 16, above Battle Royale and below The Great God Pan.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was hard to spot. It was either going to be around there, or I was going to have to rank it way higher. It's in this weird spot for me.
Hello, Mr. Stein.
Hello, Mr. Black.
Who's that?
He's the new drama teacher.
And then Zombie Day, we've already mentioned this. It's sort of a spin-off of The Dead Zone. It heavily involves the spirit... Well, it's debatably heavily involves the spirit of Frank Dodd, who is one of the two villains of The Dead Zone, and also George Bannerman, who appears in The Dead Zone. And he specifically mentions Johnny Smith, who's the protagonist of The Dead Zone, when he's talking, thinking to himself, I should have called in. That's procedure. You always follow procedure. And he thinks to himself, well, if I was the kind of cop who followed procedure, I never would have brought in Smith on the Dodd case. And that's how he solved the Dodd case. Well, it's how the Dodd case was solved.
All right, but at the same time, like...
He should have called in.
He should have called in. Like,
yeah.
I feel like calling in is a little bit different. Like, you were sent to look for the car.
Yeah.
You found the car.
You called in.
Call in the car.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I guess his thought was, if he called it in, they might ask, are the woman and child there? And he would have had to say, hold on, I'm going to go look.
Yeah.
But you still...
But then if he doesn't report back,
they know.
Somebody.
Yeah, they know, yeah.
So...
Which is the point. And that's something that's come up in, like, lots of cop movies and cop stories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it at the same time, it's also, like, a very realistic mistake for someone to make.
I would assume that's also why most cops work as partners.
Mm-hmm.
But, again, he's a sheriff, and it's a small town. He probably doesn't have that many deputies.
Yeah.
Homework. So if you're in Donna's place and you're reliving this whole event, but you get to replace Cujo with a different Stephen King animal character, and you get to replace Tad with a different Stephen King child character.
Okay.
What would you do?
Okay, I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm sure this kind of falls outside the rule. It's going to be the werewolf from Silver Bullet.
That's fine.
Only he's bit as well.
Oh.
The creature got bitten.
Oh, no.
And the kid with me is going to be Richie, so I at least can hear jokes on my way out.
Okay, so similar-ish. So the animal is going to be Randall Flagg's wolves from The Stand, the ones that kill the kid.
Yeah.
And the kid will be Henry Bowers from It. And my plan
is to throw him out.
is to beat the shit out of Henry Bowers, throw him to the wolves, and then when they swarm him, run.
I like that.
Yeah. I'm not proud of even like a shitty kid like him, I'm not proud of beating up a kid and throwing him to a pack of wolves. But if I'm going to throw a kid to the wolves, it's going to be Henry Bowers.
You know, I'd probably pick a smaller kid because I get the feeling that Henry Bowers might be able to beat the shit out of me.
I'll wait till he falls asleep.
Yeah, and then you just get on. Okay. Yeah. When he's weak after a few days of no food.
I mean, I'm not much of a fighter, so. For further reading, I have Pet Sematary and also Jaws.
Jaws is pretty good.
If you've not read the Jaws novel,
it's on my list.
It is extremely similar to this, even to the point of the adultery being a sub-theme. If you've only seen the movie, so Richard Dreyfuss's character, the scientist, he has an affair with the sheriff's wife, and it's like start to finish.
Mm-hmm.
And to me it's way worse than Cujo, because instead of seeing the end of the affair, you see the seduction and the initial cheating in their first time, and then
that's pretty bad.
Yeah, it's way worse. And then also an animal that eats people.
Have you seen the TV series Castle Rock yet?
No, not yet.
I'm sure if you like the Castle Rock setting.
I want to read a couple more of the books that take place in Castle Rock before I watch that, but I do want to watch it.
Yeah, I think it opens up in Shawshank is where it starts.
That's cool.
And like you see like the I think because I haven't read Shawshank Redemption, I've just seen the movie.
The book is also very good.
But like it opens with like the blood stain from where the warden shot himself. On the one they talk about it.
From what I remember, the book and the movie are almost exactly the same. It's what I remember the book being different about the book is it has much more vivid descriptions of anal rape from the prisoners, as you would expect.
Hooray!
Yeah.
Finally, a book for me.
Okay, and hopefully we have something for you upcoming on the Horror of Babylon. Next week, May 26th, we are, of course, doing the film adaptation of Cujo. And then our next book will be the first Sunday in June. We are reading The Wind Through the Keyhole by Stephen King, continuing our Dark Tower series, which we're now doing the first Sunday of every other month. So the next book, The Wolves of Kala, will be the first Sunday in August, because we're giving ourselves 2 months to get through those. And then our next two bonus episodes on Thursday the 23rd, we are watching Willy's Wonderland with Nicolas Cage. And on Thursday, May 30th, we are watching Freaky with Catherine Newton and Vince Vaughn. And I would have to say that if I was going to switch bodies with anybody,
it would be with one of our patrons.
With one of our patrons, so I can know what the hell they see in us. And thank you to them, including Abigail the First, Breaker of Chains, Mother of Dragons, and
Logan,
the Full Metal Patron, and Ben, the Fourth Patron of Hope, and Mia the Fifth, the Rainmaker.
She makes it rain, yeah.
Oh, she makes it rain. And Sierra the Sixth, the Keyblade Patron. And thank you to Horsemen Comics and Gaming, which you can visit at the Morgantown Mall in Morgantown, West Virginia, the Mall at Robinson in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. You can shop online at forhorsemen.tcgplayerpro.com. And if you make it into the store, you can't say hello to Ronald the Third Grampus of Christmas, because he actually just moved one of his locations up to Castle Rock, Maine. There was a little shop called Needful Things that just went out of business, and Ron decided to open a new location of Four Horsemen Comics in the same building.
Okay.
And he's going to call it Four Horsemen Comics and Not So Needful Things. All right, well, I say this every episode, but I really mean it this time. Thank you for reading Cujo.
I can't wait to see what I dreamed tonight.
Terrible, terrible things. And recording as well. Thank you to our patrons. Stay tuned for our socials. Make sure there are no monsters in your closet, and stay scary.
Stay scary, everybody.
And now for the obligatory socials. Please like, share, and subscribe. You can find the podcast on Twitter at HorrorPod69. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Slasher, and Goodreads. Become part of the Disturbed community by asking for the Facebook group and Discord links. Send dick pics to the Horror of Babylon podcast at gmail.com. Support the show at patreon.com/the Horror of Babylon. In closing, you can let your friends know that The Horror of Babylon is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible, and all other major podcast apps. Stay scary.